I can't go back to you, my friend. Don't even ask, don't play pretend.
The first cracks in my marriage to Lucy began to show subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. It was in the small changes that I noticed, the way she would linger a little longer at work, the increasing number of late-night meetings, and the phone calls she'd take in hushed tones from the other room. At first, I brushed it off as the inevitable stress of her demanding job. Lucy was always ambitious, her career as a corporate lawyer demanding long hours and unwavering dedication. But it wasn't until those late nights became more frequent and her absences longer that I started to sense something more ominous was at play. One evening, as I sat alone at the dinner table, the untouched food growing cold, I decided to call her. "Hey, where are you?" "Dinner's getting cold," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, hiding the worry that gnawed at my insides. "I'm sorry, Mark," she replied, her voice tinny and distant through the phone. "I'm at the office. We have a big case coming up, and I'm swamped. Don't wait up for me." Again, I tried to keep the edge out of my voice. "This is the third night this week, Lucy. Is everything okay?" There was a pause, a hesitation that spoke volumes. "Everything's fine. Just work, you know how it is." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was something in her tone, a note of detachment that made my heart sink. As the weeks passed, the late nights became routine. She was always either too busy or too tired. Our conversations grew shorter, filled with the mundane details of daily life, void of the warmth and intimacy we once shared. One Friday evening, I decided to surprise her at her office. I brought along her favorite takeout, hoping to rekindle some semblance of our old connection. As I approached her office, I saw her through the glass door, talking animatedly with a colleague. They were standing too close, their laughter too intimate. I stood there for a moment, frozen, watching as she leaned in to whisper something in his ear, her hand lightly touching his arm. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I pushed open the door, trying to mask my unease with a smile. "Hey, Lucy. Thought I'd bring you dinner." She looked up, surprise and something else, guilt, flashing in her eyes. "Mark, what are you doing here?" "I thought you might need a break," I said, holding up the bags of takeout. "I know how hard you've been working." Her colleague, a tall man with sharp features and an overly friendly smile, extended his hand. "You must be Mark. I've heard a lot about you." "All good, I hope," I replied, shaking his hand firmly, sizing him up. "Of course," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lucy talks about you all the time." I turned to Lucy, searching her face for any sign of the woman I fell in love with. "Are you almost done here? We could eat together, maybe catch up." She glanced at her colleague before nodding reluctantly. "Sure, let me just wrap this up." As we sat in her office, the silence was heavy. I tried to make small talk, but my mind kept drifting back to the way she had looked at him, the ease of their interaction. "Is everything really okay, Lucy?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like you're miles away, even when you're here." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's just work, Mark. I don't know what else to say. I'm tired, and there's so much pressure. Can we not do this right now?" I nodded, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as we lay in bed, back to back, I couldn't shake the feeling that something precious was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. The first cracks had appeared, and I feared they would soon widen into an irreparable rift. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of the end. It started with little things, subtle changes in our daily routine that might have gone unnoticed if I weren't already on edge. Lucy had always been meticulous with her phone. Messages were promptly replied to, calls rarely missed. But now, her phone would ring, and she'd glance at it before silencing it without answering. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the bedside table. Glancing at the screen, I saw the name David flash up. David. I didn't remember her mentioning any David from work. Curiosity gnawed at me, but I ignored it, convincing myself it was probably nothing. The following week, I noticed Lucy becoming increasingly secretive with her phone. She'd take calls in another room, speak in hushed tones, and her messages were often followed by a quick swipe to clear the notifications. One Saturday morning, I decided to approach her. We were having breakfast, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the table. "Lucy, who's David?" I asked casually, trying to sound nonchalant as I sipped my coffee. She looked up, startled, a piece of toast halfway to her mouth. "David? Oh, he's just a colleague. We've been working closely on the Anderson case." I nodded, but her quick response didn't sit right with me. "You never mentioned him before." She shrugged, setting her toast down. "I guess it just never came up." "Why do you ask?" "No reason, just curious. He seems to call a lot." Lucy's eyes narrowed slightly, and she forced a smile. "It's a big case, Mark. Lots of late nights and coordination. You know how it is." I wanted to believe her, but my gut told me something was off. Over the next few days, I started to pay closer attention. Her missed calls and hurried texts increased, and her explanations for late nights became vaguer. One evening, she came home later than usual, her hair slightly disheveled, a hint of perfume I didn't recognize clinging to her clothes. "Hey," I greeted her, trying to mask my concern. "Long day." "Yeah," she sighed, dropping her bag by the door. David and I were going over the final details for tomorrow's presentation. I felt a pang of jealousy at the casual mention of his name. "You seem to spend a lot of time with him." She gave me a tired smile. "He's my project partner, Mark. It's just work." Just work. That phrase began to echo in my mind, a mantra I repeated to myself every time my suspicions flared. But as days turned into weeks, the little things started to add up. One night, I decided to talk to my best friend, Tom, about it. We met at our usual bar, the dim lighting and familiar buzz of conversation providing a comforting backdrop. "So what's been eating you, Mark?" Tom asked, taking a sip of his beer. I hesitated, swirling my drink. "It's Lucy. Something's off." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Off how?" I took a deep breath, recounting the missed calls, the secretive texts, and the late nights. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I can't shake this feeling that something's wrong. Tom listened quietly, nodding. "Have you talked to her about it?" "Not really," I admitted. I tried asking about David, but she brushed it off. "I don't want to seem paranoid, but you're worried," Tom finished for me. "Look, Mark, trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right, it's worth addressing. Maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's something. You won't know unless you ask." He was right, of course. But the thought of confronting Lucy, of possibly uncovering a truth I wasn't ready to face, terrified me. That night, as Lucy slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. The little things, missed calls, hidden messages, unexplained absences, had begun to weave a web of doubt and mistrust around me. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The time had come to confront the secrets lurking in the shadows of our marriage, no matter how painful the truth might be. Weeks of sleepless nights and a growing sense of dread had taken their toll on me. I couldn't concentrate at work, my mind constantly replaying every suspicious moment, every lie by omission. It felt like I was living in a nightmare, with each day blurring into the next, my once stable world crumbling around me. The only solution was to confront Lucy directly, but the thought filled me with a paralyzing fear. What if my worst fears were confirmed? What if everything I suspected was true? One Friday evening, I came home early, determined to finally have the conversation that had been looming over us for weeks. Lucy was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The rhythmic sound of the knife hitting the cutting board was almost soothing, but it did nothing to calm my racing heart. "Lucy, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to sound calm. She looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. What's wrong, Mark? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It's about your late nights, the missed calls, the messages you keep hidden. I can't ignore it anymore. I need to know what's going on. She set the knife down and wiped her hands on a towel, her expression hardening. There's nothing to talk about, Mark. I've told you, it's just work. Just work. I echoed, my frustration boiling over. You've been saying that for weeks, but it's more than that, isn't it? I see the way you've been acting, the way you talk to David. I'm not blind, Lucy. Her face flushed, and she crossed her arms defensively. You're being paranoid. David is just a colleague. We're working on a big case, and yes, it means late nights and constant communication. That's all there is to it. Then why do you hide your phone? Why do you take calls in another room? My voice was rising, the pent-up tension of the past weeks spilling out. If there's nothing to hide, why are you being so secretive? Lucy's eyes flashed with anger. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Mark. You're the one who's been distant, always questioning me, never trusting me. This isn't about David or work. This is about us and your inability to trust me. I felt a lump in my throat, the painful truth of her words hitting me hard. Maybe I am distant. Maybe I am questioning you. But that's because everything about us has changed. Lucy, you've changed. She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter, her shoulders tense. And you think I haven't noticed the change in you. You're always suspicious, always accusing. It's suffocating. A heavy silence fell between us, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us both. I wanted to reach out to her, to bridge the growing chasm between us, but I didn't know how. The walls we built around ourselves felt insurmountable. Lucy, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. I love you, and I don't want to lose you, but I need you to be honest with me. If there's something more, something you're not telling me, please, just say it. She turned back to face me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. You want honesty. Fine. I've been spending time with David because he listens to me. He supports me. It's something I haven't felt from you in a long time. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I staggered back, struggling to process what she just said. Are you saying you've been seeing him? Lucy's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. No, Mark, it's not like that. We haven't. It's not physical, but I can't deny that I've developed feelings for him. Feelings that should be for you. My heart shattered, the fragile remnants of our marriage crumbling to dust. So what now? What does this mean for us? She wiped her tears, her expression resolute. I don't know, Mark. I need time to think, to figure out what I want. Maybe we both need some time apart. I nodded, the numbness spreading through me like a cold wave. Maybe you're right. As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving Lucy standing there with tears streaming down her face, I felt a profound sense of loss. The confrontation had confirmed my worst fears, but it had also laid bare the truth we'd both been avoiding. Our marriage was broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. The tension in our home had become unbearable. Each conversation felt like walking on a tightrope, and the silence was heavy with unspoken accusations and unresolved anger. It was as if we were living in a house of cards, and the slightest gust of wind could bring everything crashing down. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, I came home to find Lucy sitting in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. The sight of her, so detached and distant, ignited a fire of frustration within me. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay, that we could continue living like strangers under the same roof. Lucy, we need to talk, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation. She looked up, her eyes dull and tired. Not now, Mark. I'm exhausted. No, I insisted, stepping closer. We're doing this now. I can't keep living like this, not knowing the truth. What's really going on with you and David? She sighed heavily, running a hand through her hair. I told you, it's nothing. Just work. Don't lie to me. I shouted, the frustration boiling over. I deserve to know the truth. Are you seeing him? Are you cheating on me? The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Lucy's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Yes, she finally whispered, her voice choked with tears. Yes, I've been seeing him. The world seemed to spin around me, the betrayal hitting me like a physical blow. I staggered back, gripping the edge of the sofa for support. How could you? I demanded, my voice breaking. After everything we've been through, how could you do this to us? She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I was lonely, Mark. You were always so distant, so wrapped up in your own world. David was there for me in a way you haven't been for a long time. That's no excuse. I shouted, my anger bubbling over. You made vows, Lucy. You promised to be faithful. And what about you? She shot back, her voice rising. You promised to love and cherish me, but you haven't been doing that, have you? You've been cold and distant, pushing me away. I needed someone, and David was there. Her words cut deep, each accusation a knife to the heart. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I knew she was right. I had been distant, lost in my own worries and frustrations, but that didn't justify her betrayal. So what now? I asked, my voice hollow. What happens to us? Lucy wiped her tears, looking defeated. I don't know, Mark. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but I don't think we can go back to the way things were. The reality of her words sank in, the finality of them. Our marriage, the life we had built together, was crumbling before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I think you should leave, I said quietly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I need time to think, to process this. She nodded, standing up and heading towards the bedroom to pack a bag. As I watched her go, a wave of grief and anger washed over me. The truth had been revealed, and it had shattered my world. The betrayal was overwhelming, leaving me feeling lost and alone in the ruins of our marriage. A few minutes later, Lucy emerged with a small suitcase, her eyes avoiding mine. I'll stay with a friend, she said softly, pausing at the door. I'm truly sorry, Mark. I couldn't find the words to respond. As she walked out the door, the silence that followed was deafening. The life we had known was over, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered heart. The days that followed Lucy's departure were some of the darkest of my life. Our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, felt like a hollow shell echoing with the ghosts of our past. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph reminded me of what we had lost. The silence was suffocating, but it was also a harsh companion that forced me to confront the reality of our situation. The decision to end our marriage wasn't made lightly. I spent countless nights tossing and turning, replaying every moment, every argument, every sign I had missed. The betrayal cut deep, but deeper still was the realization that our relationship had been unraveling long before David entered the picture. We had both contributed to the downfall, but her infidelity was the final, irrevocable blow. One evening, I sat at the dining table, staring at the divorce papers. The lawyer had been efficient, almost too efficient, and the neatly typed documents seemed to mock the mess of emotions swirling inside me. My hand trembled as I picked up the pen, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Just as I was about to sign, my phone buzzed. It was Lucy. "Mark, can we talk?" she asked, her voice strained. "There's nothing left to talk about, Lucy," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please, just hear me out. I owe you that much." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Fine. Come over." A half-hour later, she arrived, looking more fragile than I had ever seen her. We sat across from each other at the table, the divorce papers lying between us like a barrier we couldn't cross. "I know I've hurt you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to understand why. Why? I echoed, my anger flaring up. You betrayed me, Lucy. How can I ever understand that? She wiped away a tear, her eyes pleading. We stopped communicating, Mark. We stopped being there for each other. I felt so alone, and David, he filled that void. I shook my head, the bitterness rising. So you decided to find comfort in someone else. That's your excuse. It's not an excuse, she said, her voice breaking. It's the truth. I made a terrible mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But our problems started long before that. Her word hung in the air, and for a moment, I saw the pain in her eyes mirrored in my own heart. We had both contributed to the erosion of our marriage, but the betrayal was a wound too deep to heal. I've made my decision, I said quietly, pushing the papers towards her. This is the only way forward for us. Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. We signed the papers in silence, each stroke of the pen a final nail in the coffin of our relationship. When it was done, we sat there for a moment, the weight of our decision settling over us. I'm sorry it had to end this way, she said, her voice barely audible. So am I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. As she left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. The process of separating our lives had begun, and it was filled with bitterness and sorrow. But there was also a sense of closure, a small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild my life from the ruins. The following weeks were a blur of packing, dividing assets, and navigating the legal maze of divorce. Each step was painful, a reminder of the life we had built together and were now dismantling piece by piece. Friends and family tried to offer support, but their words felt hollow, unable to reach the depths of my grief. One evening, as I packed the last of my belongings, I came across an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I saw the smiles, the shared moments of joy, and the love that had once seemed unbreakable. I closed the album and placed it in a box, a silent acknowledgement of the past that had brought me to this point. The finality of our decision was undeniable, but as I stood in the empty house, I realized that this was also a beginning. A painful, sorrowful beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. And as I closed the door behind me for the last time, I took a deep breath, ready to face the uncertain future ahead. Adjusting to life as a single man was harder than I ever anticipated. The house, once filled with the noise and energy of a shared life, now felt unbearably empty. Every room echoed with memories of better times, and the silence was deafening. The bed felt too large, the meals too lonely, and the evenings stretched out endlessly, a yawning chasm of solitude and regret. The first morning alone, I wandered through the house aimlessly, unsure of what to do with myself. I made a pot of coffee, but the familiar ritual felt hollow without Lucy's presence. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the mug, the steam curling up like ghosts of the past. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from John, my old college friend. Hey, Mark. Haven't seen you in a while. Let's grab a drink tonight. I hesitated. The thought of socializing felt exhausting, but I knew I couldn't continue isolating myself. I needed to reconnect with the world outside my own head. Sure, John. Let's meet at O'Malley's at 7, I replied. That evening, I walked into O'Malley's, a local bar where John and I had spent countless nights in our younger days. The familiar smell of beer and fried food hit me, and for a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia. John was already there, sitting at our usual booth, a pint of beer in front of him. Mark. He greeted me warmly, standing up to give me a hug. It's good to see you, man. You too, John, I said, managing a smile. It's been too long. We sat down, and I ordered a beer. For a while, we talked about trivial things, work, mutual friends, the latest sports scores. It felt good to have a distraction, but eventually, the conversation turned to more serious matters. So, how are you holding up? John asked, his tone gentle. I heard about you and Lucy. I'm really sorry, man. I took a deep breath, the familiar pain welling up inside me. It's been tough, John. Harder than I expected. The house feels so empty without her. John nodded, his eyes filled with sympathy. I can only imagine. But you're not alone, Mark. We're all here for you. If you need anything, just say the word. I appreciate that, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to move on. Everything reminds me of her. It's going to take time, John said, his hand resting on my shoulder. But you will get through this, one day at a time, okay? I nodded, grateful for his support. Yeah, one day at a time. The next few weeks were a blur of trying to establish a new routine. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office to avoid coming home to the empty house. I tried to reconnect with old hobbies, but everything felt forced, as if I were going through the motions without any real joy or purpose. One evening, as I was attempting to cook dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Susan, a neighbor and friend who had always been close to both Lucy and me. "Hi, Mark," she said, offering a warm smile. "I thought you might like some company. I brought lasagna." I felt a wave of gratitude. "Thanks, Susan. Come on in." We sat at the dining table, eating the lasagna and chatting. It was a simple act, but it brought a sense of normalcy to the chaos of my life. "I know it's hard," Susan said gently. "But you're strong, Mark. You'll find your way through this." "I hope so," I said, looking down at my plate. "I just feel so lost." "That's natural," she said. "But remember, it's okay to lean on your friends. We're here for you." After Susan left, I sat in the quiet of the living room, reflecting on her words. It was true. I didn't have to go through this alone. My friends were a lifeline, and though the pain was still raw, their support was a beacon of hope. Slowly, I began to carve out a new routine. I joined a local gym, started taking long walks in the park, and even signed up for a cooking class. Each small step was a way to reclaim a sense of purpose, to rebuild a life that had been shattered. One evening, as I was walking in the park, my phone rang. It was my sister, Emily. "Hey, big brother," she said, her voice cheerful. "How are you holding up?" "I'm doing okay, Emily," I replied, feeling a bit more hopeful. "It's been tough, but I'm starting to find my footing." "That's good to hear," she said. "Remember, you're stronger than you think. And if you ever need to talk, I'm just a phone call away." "Thanks, Emily. That means a lot." As I hung up, I felt a surge of determination. Life after Lucy was hard, but it was also a chance to rediscover who I was, to rebuild and grow. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. The house still felt empty, and I still struggled with loneliness, but with each passing day, I was learning to navigate this new reality. One step at a time, I was finding my way forward, surrounded by the support of friends and family who believed in me, even when I struggled to believe in myself. A new chapter in my life began on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was mowing the lawn, trying to keep busy and distract myself from the emptiness that still gnawed at me. The sun was high, and the rhythmic hum of the mower was almost meditative. I was lost in thought when I noticed a figure waving from across the street. It was Skipper, my neighbor. We had exchanged polite nods before, but never more than that. She was a petite woman with a warm smile that seemed to brighten her whole face. Today, she was holding a basket of fresh vegetables, presumably from her garden. "Hi, Mark," she called out, her voice cheerful. "Got a minute?" I shut off the mower and walked over, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Hey, Skipper, what's up?" She held out the basket. I had a surplus of tomatoes and zucchini. "Thought you might like some." I took the basket, surprised by her kindness. "Thanks, Skipper. This is really nice of you." She smiled, a little shyly. "It's nothing, really. I know it's been a tough time for you. I thought maybe we could chat, if you're up for it." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, That sounds good. Do you want to come in? We walked into the house, and I led her to the kitchen. The space felt less empty with her presence. I set the basket on the counter and motioned to the coffee maker. Can I get you some coffee? Sure, that would be great, she said, sitting at the kitchen table. As the coffee brewed, we made small talk about the neighborhood, the weather, and her garden. It was the first real conversation I'd had in weeks, and it felt surprisingly easy. So, how have you been holding up? Skipper asked gently, her eyes full of genuine concern. I sighed, pouring the coffee into 2 mugs. It's been rough. Some days are better than others, but it's a process, I guess. She nodded, taking a sip of her coffee. I can't imagine how hard it must be. If you ever need someone to talk to or just hang out with, I'm here. Thanks, Skipper. That means a lot, I said, feeling a warmth that had been missing for so long. Over the next few weeks, Skipper and I started spending more time together. She had a way of making the ordinary feel special, and her presence became a comforting constant in my life. We would sit on my porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. I learned she was an artist, specializing in watercolor paintings. Her work was stunning, capturing the beauty of everyday moments with a delicate touch. One evening, as we watched the sunset, I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone else. You know, I said, looking out at the fading light, I never thought I'd be here, in this place, feeling so lost. Skipper turned to me, her expression soft. It's okay to feel that way, Mark. You've been through a lot, but you're not alone. I'm here, and so are your friends and family. I know, I said, sighing, but sometimes it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. She reached out and placed a hand on my arm. You'll get there, one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, our connection deepened. Skipper had a gentle way of encouraging me to step out of my comfort zone. One weekend, she invited me to a local art fair where she was displaying her work. I'd love for you to see my paintings, she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I'd like that, I replied, feeling a mix of curiosity and nervousness. At the fair, I was amazed by the breadth of Skipper's talent. Her paintings were a window into her soul, vivid landscapes, tender portraits, and abstract pieces that seemed to capture emotions in a swirl of colors. I watched as she interacted with visitors, her passion for her art evident in every word and gesture. Your work is incredible, I said, genuinely impressed. She blushed, looking pleased. Thank you, Mark. It means a lot to hear that from you. As the fair wound down, we sat on a bench, enjoying the evening breeze. I felt a sense of contentment that had been missing for so long. Skipper had brought a light back into my life, one that I hadn't realized I needed. Skipper, I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Thank you for everything. You've been a true friend. She smiled, her eyes shining with kindness. I'm glad I could be here for you, Mark. And I hope we can continue to be friends, no matter what. I nodded, feeling a sense of hope for the first time in a long while. I'd like that. As we walked back to our homes, I realized that meeting Skipper was more than just a chance encounter. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with possibilities and the promise of healing. Life after Lucy was still a challenge, but with Skipper by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. As summer gave way to the crisp days of fall, my relationship with Skipper blossomed into something deeper. What had started as a tentative friendship turned into something that filled the void left by Lucy's departure. Skipper's presence was like a soothing balm to my wounded heart, and before long, I found myself looking forward to every moment we spent together. One Saturday morning, we decided to visit the local farmer's market. The air was filled with the scent of fresh produce and baked goods, and the colorful stalls added a festive feel to the day. As we walked side by side, our hands brushed, and without thinking, I took hers in mine. She smiled up at me, and the warmth of her touch sent a jolt of happiness through me. Do you come here often? I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. She laughed, a sound that always made me smile. Almost every week. I love the fresh fruits and vegetables. Plus, it's a great way to support local farmers. We wandered from stall to stall, sampling homemade jams, cheeses, and pastries. At one point, we stopped at a stand selling hand-knit scarves. Skipper tried on a bright red one, wrapping it around her neck. "What do you think?" she asked, twirling in front of me. "You look beautiful," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She blushed, and for a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other. The connection between us was palpable, and I realized how much I had grown to care for her. Later that day, we sat on a bench overlooking the river, sharing a loaf of freshly baked bread and some cheese. The water sparkled in the afternoon sun, and the world felt at peace. "Mark," Skipper said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I want you to know how much you mean to me. You've brought so much joy into my life." I turned to her, my heart swelling with emotion. "You've done the same for me, Skipper. I don't know what I would have done without you these past few months." She reached out and took my hand. "I know it's been hard for you, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." "Thank you," I said, squeezing her hand. "I feel the same way about you." That evening, we returned to my place, and I cooked dinner for us, a simple pasta dish with fresh vegetables from the market. As we ate, we talked about our hopes and dreams, sharing stories and laughter. "I've always wanted to travel," Skipper said, twirling her fork in her pasta. "There's so much of the world I haven't seen yet. Where would you go first?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Europe, I think," she replied. "Italy, maybe. I'd love to see the art and architecture, and of course, try the food." "I've always wanted to go to Italy, too," I said, feeling a sense of excitement. "Maybe we could go together someday." She looked at me, her eyes bright with possibility. "I'd like that." After dinner, we moved to the living room, where a fire crackled in the fireplace. We sat on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. The warmth of her body next to mine was comforting, and I felt a deep sense of contentment. "Skipper," I said softly, "I want you to know that I'm falling for you. You've brought light back into my life, and I'm so grateful for that." She lifted her head and looked at me, her eyes shining. "I feel the same way, Mark. I've been afraid to say it, but I think I'm falling in love with you." Hearing those words, my heart soared. I leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of all the emotions I couldn't put into words. When we pulled back, she smiled at me, and I knew that this was the start of something beautiful. From that moment on, our relationship grew rapidly. We spent more time together, exploring the city, going on hikes, and even starting small projects around the house. The emptiness that had once filled my life was replaced with joy and anticipation for the future. One evening, as we were painting the living room, Skipper turned to me, her face smeared with paint. "You know, this place is starting to feel like home." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. "That's because of you. You've made it a home." She walked over and kissed me, her lips soft and warm. "I love you, Mark." "I love you too, Skipper," I replied, knowing that with her by my side, I could face anything. As the days turned into weeks and then months, our bond only grew stronger. We were no longer two broken souls seeking solace, but a couple united by love and hope. Skipper had given me a second chance at happiness, and I was determined to cherish it. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly hopeful about the future. As the days passed and our relationship with Skipper blossomed, I found myself experiencing a newfound sense of happiness. However, with happiness came an unexpected visitor, old insecurities that I thought I had left behind. At first, it was subtle, a twinge of jealousy when Skipper mentioned an old friend or a moment of paranoia when she received a text message late at night. I tried to brush off these feelings, reminding myself that Skipper had done nothing to deserve my distrust. But despite my best efforts, the nagging doubts persisted, gnawing away at the edges of my newfound contentment. One evening, Skipper suggested going out for dinner at a new restaurant in town. As we sat at our table, enjoying our meal, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a dark cloud. "Is everything okay, Mark?" Skipper asked, her brow furrowing with concern. I forced a smile, trying to push aside my irrational fears. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just tired, I guess." But Skipper wasn't convinced. She reached across the table and took my hand, her touch grounding me in reality. "Mark, you can talk to me," she said softly. "I can tell something's bothering you." I sighed, feeling the weight of my insecurities bearing down on me. It's stupid, really. I can't shake this feeling that... That what? Skipper prompted gently, her eyes full of understanding. "That you'll leave me," I blurted out, the words tumbling from my lips before I could stop them. "That you'll find someone better, and I'll be left alone again." Skipper's expression softened, and she squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Mark, look at me," she said, waiting until I met her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone anymore, okay? You have me." I wanted to believe her, to let go of the irrational fears that gripped me, but old wounds ran deep, and the scars of past betrayals still haunted me. "I know it's just..." I trailed off, unable to put into words the turmoil raging inside me. Skipper reached across the table and cupped my cheek, her touch gentle yet firm. "Mark, listen to me. I love you, and I'm not going to let anything come between us. We're in this together, remember?" Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of my insecurities. I took a deep breath, allowing her love to wash over me and soothe the doubts that threatened to consume me. "I'm sorry," I said, feeling a sense of shame for burdening her with my irrational fears. Skipper shook her head, her eyes filled with compassion. "There's nothing to apologize for, Mark. We all have our demons to face, but together we can overcome anything." And in that moment, as we sat together in the soft glow of the restaurant, I knew that Skipper was right. With her by my side, I had the strength to confront my old jealousies and fears, and to embrace the love and happiness that awaited us. The fragile peace I had found with Skipper was shattered by an unexpected encounter with Zach Oldendorf, a mutual acquaintance from our past. It was a chance meeting, one that I would come to regret deeply. I ran into Zach at a local coffee shop one afternoon, his smug grin sending a chill down my spine. Despite my instinct to avoid him, he sauntered over to my table, his confidence bordering on arrogance. Well, if it isn't Mark," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Fancy meeting you here." I forced a polite smile, hoping to end the interaction as quickly as possible. "Hello, Zach. What brings you here?" He chuckled, taking a seat opposite me without invitation. "Oh, just passing through. Thought I'd grab a coffee and catch up with an old friend." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Zach was no friend of mine, and his presence filled me with a sense of unease. I glanced around the coffee shop, hoping for a distraction, but there was none to be found. "So, Mark," Zach said, leaning back in his chair, "how's life treating you these days? Still pining over Lucy?" The mention of Lucy sent a jolt of anger through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Lucy and I are no longer together," I replied evenly. "And I prefer not to discuss her." Zach raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "Ah, I see. Moving on to greener pastures, are we?" I clenched my fists under the table, struggling to maintain my composure. Zach's casual attitude toward relationships was like a slap in the face, a painful reminder of the betrayal I had suffered. "Actually, I'm in a relationship with someone else now," I said, hoping to steer the conversation away from Lucy. Zach's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing with interest. "Oh, and who's the lucky lady?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Her name is Skipper," I said finally. She's amazing." Zach's smirk returned, and I braced myself for whatever snide remark he had in store. But instead of mocking me, he leaned forward, his eyes alight with mischief. "Skipper, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sounds like a real catch." I frowned, feeling a surge of protectiveness toward Skipper. "She is," I said firmly, my tone leaving no room for argument. Zach shrugged, unfazed by my response. "Well, good for you, Mark. Just don't get too attached. You never know when the grass might start looking greener on the other side." With that cryptic remark, Zach rose from his seat and sauntered out of the coffee shop, leaving me seething with anger and uncertainty. His words echoed in my mind, stirring up old fears about trust and fidelity. As I sat alone at the table, I couldn't shake the feeling that Zach's unwelcome encounter had planted a seed of doubt in my mind, one that threatened to unravel the fragile bond I had with Skipper. And as much as I tried to push it away, I couldn't shake the nagging fear that history might repeat itself, leaving me broken and alone once more. The weight of my jealousy and insecurities bore down on me like a heavy burden, threatening to crush the fragile bond I shared with Skipper. Despite my efforts to push aside my doubts and fears, they continued to gnaw away at me, festering beneath the surface until they reached a breaking point. It happened on a bright Saturday morning, as Skipper and I set out for a hike along the winding trails of the nearby state park. The air was crisp and fresh, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. It should have been a perfect day, a chance to escape the confines of our worries and lose ourselves in the beauty of nature. But instead, it became the catalyst for a confrontation that would change everything. As we walked, Skipper chatted animatedly about her plans for the future, a trip she wanted to take, a project she wanted to start. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to forget about my lingering doubts. But then, in a moment of carelessness, I stumbled over a tree root, sending a cascade of doubts crashing back into my mind. A seed of suspicion took root, and before I knew it, I found myself questioning Skipper's every word and action. "Who were you texting?" I blurted out, my voice sharper than intended. Skipper stopped in her tracks, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What?" "Earlier, when we stopped to rest," I pressed, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who were you texting?" Skipper's expression shifted from confusion to frustration, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. "It was just my sister," she replied, her voice tight with emotion. "Why? Does it matter?" The words hung in the air between us, heavy with accusation and doubt. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat, choked by the weight of my own insecurities. "Mark," Skipper said softly, reaching out to touch my arm. "What's wrong? Why are you acting like this?" I pulled away from her touch, unable to meet her gaze. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling a surge of shame wash over me. "I'm sorry, Skipper. I can't shake this feeling that—" "That what?" she prompted, her voice tinged with sadness. "That you'll leave me," I confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "That you'll find someone better, and I'll be left alone again." Skipper's eyes softened, and she took a step closer, her hand reaching out to cup my cheek. "Mark, look at me," she said, her voice gentle yet firm. "I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone anymore. Okay, you have me." I wanted to believe her, to let go of the irrational fears that gripped me, but old wounds ran deep, and the scars of past betrayals still haunted me. "I know, it's just—" I trailed off, unable to put into words the turmoil raging inside me. Skipper reached out and took both of my hands in hers, her touch grounding me in reality. "Mark, listen to me. I love you, and I'm not going to let anything come between us. We're in this together, remember." Her words were like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of my insecurities. I took a deep breath, allowing her love to wash over me, and soothe the doubts that threatened to consume me. "I'm sorry," I said, feeling a sense of shame for burdening her with my irrational fears. Skipper shook her head, her eyes filled with compassion. "There's nothing to apologize for, Mark. We all have our demons to face, but together we can overcome anything. And in that moment, as we stood together in the dappled sunlight of the forest, I knew that Skipper was right. With her by my side, I had the strength to confront my old jealousies and fears, and to embrace the love and happiness that awaited us. The aftermath of our heated argument left me reeling, my mind swirling with doubts and regrets. As Skipper and I parted ways, the weight of our unresolved issues hung heavy on my shoulders, driving me to seek solace in the familiarity of old friends and familiar places. I wandered the streets aimlessly, lost in thought as I retraced the paths of my past. I found myself drawn to the places where memories lingered. The park where Lucy and I had shared lazy afternoons, the coffee shop where we used to meet for morning conversations. Each step felt like a journey into the heart of my own darkness, a chance to confront the demons that haunted me. As I sat alone in a dimly lit corner of the coffee shop, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that engulfed me. The chatter of other patrons faded into the background as I sank deeper into my own thoughts, grappling with the reality of my shattered relationship and uncertain future. Mark. The voice startled me out of my reverie, and I looked up to see an old friend standing before me. Greg, a familiar face from my college days. Greg, I said, forcing a smile. It's been a while. He took a seat opposite me, his expression filled with concern. Yeah, it has. Are you okay? You look rough. I supplied, unable to hide the weariness in my voice. Greg nodded, his gaze searching. Yeah, rough. What's been going on? I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But as I looked into Greg's kind eyes, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The kind of relief that comes from sharing burdens with someone who truly cares. I had a fight with Skipper, I admitted, the words spilling out in a rush. It was stupid, really. I let my insecurities get the best of me. And now? Greg listened intently, his expression sympathetic. I'm sorry to hear that, Mark. But fights happen, you know. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world. I sighed, feeling the weight of my own self-doubt pressing down on me. I know, but I can't shake this feeling that I'm doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Greg reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his touch a comforting anchor in the storm of my emotions. You're not alone, Mark, he said softly. We all have our struggles, but it's how we deal with them that defines us. His words struck a chord deep within me, reminding me that I was stronger than my doubts and fears. With Greg's support, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me, a glimmer of light in the darkness that threatened to consume me. Thanks, Greg, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. I needed to hear that. He smiled, his eyes shining with warmth. Anytime, Mark. Remember, you've got people who care about you. You don't have to face this alone. And as we sat together in the quiet corner of the coffee shop, I realized that Greg was right. With the support of old friends and familiar faces, I could find the strength to confront my demons and chart a course toward a brighter future. Determined to salvage what remained of our relationship, I embarked on a journey to rebuild the shattered trust between Skipper and me. It was a daunting task, one filled with uncertainty and vulnerability. But I refused to let my fears dictate the course of our future. I sought out Skipper, eager to start the process of healing our fractured bond. As we sat together in her cozy living room, surrounded by the warmth of flickering candles and the soft glow of lamplight, I knew that this conversation would be the first step toward rebuilding what we had lost. Skipper, I began, my voice tinged with hesitation. I want to talk about what happened. She nodded, her expression softening with understanding. I know, Mark. I've been thinking about it too. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the difficult conversation ahead. I'm sorry for the way I reacted, I said earnestly. I let my insecurities get the best of me, and it wasn't fair to you. Skipper reached out and took my hand, her touch a soothing balm to my troubled soul. It's okay, Mark. We all have our moments of weakness. What's important is that we're here now together. I felt a surge of gratitude wash over me, grateful for Skipper's unwavering support and understanding. I want to rebuild the trust between us, I said firmly. I don't want my fears to ruin another relationship. Skipper's eyes softened with emotion, and she squeezed my hand gently. I want that too, Mark, but it's going to take time and effort from both of us. I nodded, determined to do whatever it took to make things right. I know. That's why I want us to talk openly about our pasts and fears. I don't want any secrets between us. Skipper smiled, her eyes sparkling with determination. I agree. Let's lay everything out on the table and start fresh. And so we began the arduous process of rebuilding trust, one honest conversation at a time. We talked about our past relationships, our fears of betrayal, and our hopes for the future. With each revelation, I felt the weight of my insecurities lift, replaced by a newfound sense of clarity and understanding. As the evening wore on, I realized that rebuilding trust wasn't just about overcoming our pasts. It was about forging a stronger, more resilient bond that could weather any storm. And with Skipper by my side, I knew that we could overcome anything together. Billy's arrival into our lives was like a whirlwind, sweeping us up in a flurry of emotions and complications. She was a mutual friend, recently divorced, seeking solace and companionship in the aftermath of her own broken relationship. And though her presence brought both comfort and complication, I couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival would change everything. It was a warm summer evening when Billy first entered the picture, her laughter echoing through the crowded bar where Skipper and I had gone for a quiet drink. She was radiant, her smile lighting up the room as she greeted us with a warmth that was both genuine and infectious. "Mark, Skipper," she exclaimed, wrapping us both in a tight hug. "I can't believe it's been so long since we've seen each other." Skipper returned Billy's hug with equal enthusiasm, her eyes shining with delight. "It's so good to see you, Billy. How have you been?" Billy's smile faltered slightly, a shadow passing over her features. "Oh, you know, ups and downs," she replied, her tone casual yet tinged with sadness. I sensed the weight of her words, knowing that Billy had been through her fair share of struggles in recent months. But despite the pain she carried, there was a resilience in her spirit, a determination to face whatever life threw her way with grace and courage. As the evening wore on, Billy regaled us with stories of her adventures since the divorce, trips taken, lessons learned, and the occasional misadventure along the way. Her laughter was infectious, and soon we found ourselves caught up in her tales, our worries and insecurities momentarily forgotten. But beneath the surface, I could sense the underlying complexity of Billy's emotions, the rawness of her pain, the uncertainty of her future, and the longing for connection that burned bright within her soul. And though I wanted to offer her solace and support, I couldn't shake the feeling that her presence would only complicate our already fragile relationship. As the night drew to a close, and we bid farewell to Billy, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding creeping over me. Her entrance into our lives had brought a whirlwind of emotions and complications, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to become even more complicated in the days and weeks to come. In the days that followed Billy's entrance into our lives, I found myself drawn to her in ways I couldn't quite explain. Despite the complications her presence brought, there was a connection between us, a shared understanding born from the scars of past heartaches and the hope for a brighter future. Billy and I spent hours together, talking late into the night about our past relationships and dreams for the future. We shared our deepest fears and most cherished aspirations, finding solace and strength in each other's company. As we sat together on Billy's cozy porch, surrounded by the soft glow of twinkling fairy lights and the gentle hum of crickets in the night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a feeling of belonging that I hadn't experienced in a long time. "I never imagined my life would turn out like this," Billy admitted, her voice soft with emotion. "Divorce was never part of the plan." I reached out and took her hand, offering what little comfort I could. "I know how you feel," I said quietly. But sometimes life has a way of throwing us curveballs when we least expect it. Billy nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It's just hard, you know. Starting over. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the weight of her pain mirrored in my own heart. I understand, Billy, but you're not alone. We're in this together. And in that moment, as we sat together beneath the starlit sky, I knew that our bond went beyond mere friendship. There was a connection between us, a shared understanding of the trials and tribulations that life had thrown our way, and a determination to face them head-on, together. As the night wore on and the hours slipped away, Billy and I found comfort in each other's presence, drawing strength from the knowledge that we were not alone in our struggles. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew that with Billy by my side, I had a partner to face whatever challenges lay ahead. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world was cloaked in the soft embrace of twilight, Billy and I found ourselves engrossed in conversation on her porch once again. The air was thick with a heady scent of jasmine, and the sound of crickets chirping in the distance, a peaceful backdrop to the tumult of emotions swirling between us. As we talked, Billy's voice grew quiet, her words tinged with uncertainty. "There's something I need to tell you, Mark," she said, her gaze fixed on her hands folded in her lap. I felt a flicker of apprehension in the pit of my stomach, sensing the weight of her words before she even spoke them. "What is it, Billy?" I asked gently, reaching out to touch her arm in a silent gesture of support. She took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her confession. I've been unfaithful," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "During my marriage, I had affairs." Her words hung heavy in the air between us, the silence echoing with the weight of her revelation. And though I felt a surge of empathy for the pain she must have endured, I couldn't shake the twinge of unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. "I understand," I said softly, willing myself to offer her the same compassion and understanding she had shown me. "We've all made mistakes, Billy. What matters is that you're being honest with me now." Billy nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I wanted you to know the truth," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't want any secrets between us." Her confession deepened the bond between us, forging a connection born from shared experiences of pain and betrayal. And yet, even as our bond grew stronger, a new seed of doubt took root in my heart, a nagging fear that history might repeat itself and that trust would once again be shattered. But as I looked into Billy's tear-streaked face, I knew that I couldn't let my fears dictate the course of our relationship. If we were to move forward together, we would have to confront our demons head-on and trust that our connection was strong enough to withstand whatever trials lay ahead. Navigating the complexities of merging our families was a journey fraught with challenges and unexpected joys. As Billy and I embarked on this new chapter of our lives together, we soon found ourselves facing the daunting task of blending our separate worlds into one cohesive unit. The first meeting between our children was a nerve-wracking affair, filled with awkward silences and hesitant smiles. Billy's children, still reeling from the upheaval of their parents' divorce, eyed me warily, unsure of what to make of this new addition to their mother's life. "It's okay, kids," Billy reassured them, her voice gentle yet firm. "Mark is a friend. He's not here to replace your dad." I echoed her sentiments, offering what little comfort I could to ease their fears. "We're all in this together," I said, my voice tinged with uncertainty. "We'll take things one step at a time." As the days turned into weeks, our family slowly began to adjust to the new dynamic. There were moments of laughter and camaraderie, as our children bonded over shared interests and inside jokes. But there were also moments of frustration and tension, as we navigated the inevitable conflicts that arose from merging two distinct households. "It's not easy, is it?" Billy remarked one evening, exhaustion evident in her voice as she collapsed onto the couch beside me. I shook my head, a weary smile playing at the corners of my lips. "No, it's not," I admitted, "but nothing worth having ever is." And so we persevered, determined to build a family rooted in love, understanding, and mutual respect. Despite the challenges we faced, there was a sense of camaraderie that grew between us, a shared bond forged in the crucible of adversity. As our children grew closer and our families became more intertwined, I knew that our efforts were not in vain. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be filled with twists and turns, I was confident that together we could weather any storm that came our way. As Billy and I delved deeper into our relationship, we found ourselves confronting demons from our pasts, old wounds that had long lain dormant, waiting to be reopened. Though the journey was fraught with pain and uncertainty, we knew that facing these challenges head-on was essential for our relationship to survive and thrive. One evening, as we sat together in the dimly lit comfort of Billy's living room, the weight of our shared struggles hung heavy in the air between us. The silence was palpable, thick with unspoken fears and unresolved emotions. "It's like we're haunted by our pasts," Billy remarked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared into the flickering flames of the fireplace. I nodded in silent agreement, feeling the weight of her words mirrored in my own heart. "It's hard to escape the ghosts of our pasts," I admitted, my voice tinged with sadness. "But if we're going to move forward, we have to confront them." And so, we embarked on a journey of self-discovery and healing, determined to lay our demons to rest once and for all. We revisited old wounds, dredging up painful memories that had long been buried beneath the surface. But with each confession and revelation, we found a renewed sense of strength and resilience, a determination to overcome whatever obstacles stood in our way. "It's not easy," Billy remarked one evening, her eyes brimming with tears as she recounted a painful memory from her past. "But I know that facing these demons is the only way forward." I reached out and took her hand, offering what little comfort I could in the face of her pain. "We'll get through this together," I said softly, my voice filled with conviction. "No matter what." And as we confronted our demons side by side, I knew that our bond grew stronger with each passing day. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges, I was confident that together we could overcome anything that stood in our way. For in facing our demons, we found not only healing, but a newfound sense of hope for the future, a future filled with love, understanding, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the tranquil waters of the lake where Billy and I often found solace, I knew that the time had come to take the next step in our journey together. With a heart full of love and a mind clear of doubts, I took Billy's hand in mine, the soft lapping of the waves providing the soothing backdrop to the moment. "Billy," I began, my voice steady despite the nervous fluttering in my chest. "From the moment I met you, my life has been filled with more joy and meaning than I ever thought possible." Billy's eyes widened in surprise, her gaze fixed on mine as she listened intently to my words. "You've been my rock, my confidant, and my partner through it all," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each passing word. "And I can't imagine facing the future without you by my side." I dropped to one knee, reaching into the pocket of my jacket to retrieve a small velvet box. With trembling fingers, I opened it to reveal a glimmering diamond ring, a symbol of my love and commitment to the woman who had captured my heart. "Billy," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I met her gaze once more, "will you marry me?" For a moment, the world seemed to stand still as Billy stared at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. And then, with a radiant smile, she threw her arms around me, her answer clear even before she spoke. "Yes, Mark," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." In that moment, as we held each other close beneath the fading light of the setting sun, I knew that our love was stronger than any obstacle we might face. Despite the rocky paths we had traveled, we were committed to facing the future together, building a life founded on trust, mutual respect, and unwavering devotion. And as we gazed out at the shimmering waters of the lake, hand in hand, I knew that our journey was far from over. But with Billy by my side, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that our love would guide us through it all. The morning of our wedding dawned with a sense of quiet anticipation, the air tinged with excitement and the promise of a new beginning. As Billy and I stood side by side, surrounded by our children and closest friends, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a knowing that we were embarking on a journey filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. The ceremony was a simple affair, held in the backyard of Billy's quaint cottage. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting a warm glow over the gathered assembly as we exchanged vows beneath a canopy of blossoming cherry trees. I vow to love you unconditionally, to cherish and honor you in good times and bad, I declared, my voice strong and unwavering as I looked into Billy's eyes. And I vow to stand by your side, to support and encourage you in all that you do, Billy responded, her voice filled with emotion, as she spoke the words that bound us together as husband and wife. As we exchanged rings and sealed our vows with a tender kiss, I felt a sense of joy wash over me, a feeling of completeness that I had never known before. Surrounded by our children and closest friends, we stood together as a family, ready to face whatever life had in store for us. After the ceremony, we gathered for a simple reception, filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses raised in celebration. Our children danced and played, their laughter echoing through the air as we toasted to the future and the love that had brought us together. "This is just the beginning," Billy remarked, her eyes shining with happiness as she looked around at our gathered loved ones. "I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." I squeezed her hand gently, a smile playing at the corners of my lips. "Whatever comes our way, we'll face it together," I said, my voice filled with conviction. "We're a team, Billy. And together, there's nothing we can't overcome." And as we basked in the warmth of our love and the support of those who had gathered to celebrate with us, I knew that our journey was far from over. But with Billy by my side, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that our love would light the way.